Hello and welcome to the most detailed IS300 2JZ GE maintenance video on YouTube. I'm going to aim to show you every bolt, hose, component, torque spec, everything in this video. First I'm going to take you through all the parts I'm going to install, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my IS300 service history. It's got about 105,000 miles on at the moment, and then we're going to jump into it. I've split this video into two parts because if I didn't, it would be insanely long. This part is going to focus on the disassembly of the engine, taking all the old parts off, and part two is going to focus on the reinstallation of all the new parts. I'm actually recording this after I've done all the maintenance. It was about 2.5 months ago. I will be taking you through all of the problems that I experienced along the way, just so you don't make the same mistakes or so you can be prepared for the challenges that you're going to face. I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video. I spent about 10 days in the freezing cold winter trying to get every single angle for everyone so that it would be the most detailed and accurate. And if you want to see the rest of the build play out, then please consider subscribing. I'm going to be building this IS300 into a 600 wheel horsepower built 2JZ NAT. So it's pretty exciting. And I'll show you absolutely everything along the way, just like I have in this video. If you have any questions at all about what's in this video or about the build, then please leave a comment below. I read and reply to every single comment, so I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I've just opened a Patreon account, so if you want to support me, then I'll leave the link below. I'm also going to leave links to all the parts that I've used in this video. They are going to be UK links, so if you're from another country, the US, Europe, anywhere else in the world, then you might not want to buy from there. I bought pretty much all OEM Lexus or Toyota parts for this, and a few aftermarket parts as well, such as the radiator and the hoses. I strongly recommend that you get Toyota or Lexus parts because it is going to be the very best for your car. So this is everything that I'm going to be installing today, plus the Mishimoto radiator. We've got a list of everything here. So water pump, timing belt, auxiliary belt, idler, tensioner, thermostat, spark plugs, valve cover gaskets, cam and crank seals, which I may not install today. I might wait until I do the engine build. If they're not leaking, I'm not going to change them. Oil filter, air filter, radiator hoses, Jubilee clips. That's all for the hoses basically. Cabin filter, engine oil, radiator coolant, and these are all the tools that I bought to do the job. That's not included in the total price here. So 1269.15. I had to buy 2 torque wrenches. This one is, let me see, this one's 12 to 300 newton meters. Oh, sorry, 12 to 60 newton meters, and this one is 60 to 300 newton meters. And the crank pulley bolt is 330 newton meters tightening torque. So we're going to have to improvise a bit there. The vast majority of the parts that you see here are from Lexus Parts Direct or the Lexus dealer, such as the water pump. Believe it or not, I spent about 8 hours finding out which oil I should put in, and then just realized I just put the Lexus oil in. I know it sounds crazy, but I wanted to make sure that I had everything correct. In this box right here, we have the tool that is going to get the crank pulley bolt off, or hold it still while I get it off. Couldn't find the actual Toyota/Lexus one, so I just bought one off eBay, but it looks pretty good, and let's hope it works. Right, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is jack up the car and remove all of the plastic under tray. Okay, that's a bit of a problem. I'm going to have to take the lip off to get the jack underneath. The jacking point that I use is the front subframe. And I've also got a jack stand there and a jack stand there, but I'm leaving the jack in place lightly and locked so that, well, just for safety. Don't ever rely on just the jack or just the jack stands by themselves. If you only use one of these and the car falls, you're going to have a bad time. So before you start, make sure your transmission is set to park and your handbrake is on. I always like to give the car just a little push just to make sure it's stable. There's 19 bolts in total. There's 8 that span the front, that is the plastic tray is connected to the bumper with. There is 4 on this side here, 1, 2, 3, 4, identical on the other side. And then right in the middle here, there's 3, 1, 2, and 3 over there. They're all 10mm bolts, and you'll need an extension to get to the middle ones here. I suggest an empty box or a near empty box with little compartments in so that you can keep all the nuts and bolts we're going to take off. I've just got some little pieces of paper here that I've cut up just so I can label everything that I put in the box. I highly recommend you do this. I know it's tedious, but it'll make the process so much easier. Now the under tray's off, we're going to drain the coolant from the radiator. I've got 2 empty bottles here, screen wash bottles. I'm just going to cut the tops off and use them to drain the coolant into. Okay, there's a drain valve here that you're going to undo, and here is the hole that it comes out of. It'll just drip straight down vertically. What I recommend you do is get the 2 together here, position 1 underneath, and then as soon as it's going to fill up, just move it over. Make sure that you remove the radiator cap so that none of the air pressure keeps the coolant inside. So while we're waiting for that to drain, I'm just going to go through the service history and have a look. Interestingly, this says the paint code is 6R4 Island Green. Island Green is not the correct name for it, but I guess that's what you might have called it in the UK. I don't know. If we go to the service history now, we'll see the first service was 9,000, then 12, 15, 18, 22, 26, so really good at the beginning. 30, what's that, 34, 36, they're very close together, and that was a year apart, so the car wasn't used much between those years. Then 40,000, 43, 45, so really good service history up to 50,000 miles. 47, 48, that must have been a change in hands there. And then 55. So it stops here, but I've got receipts for the next ones. The next one after that, this is the 55, that is stamped in the book. Then after that, we've got 73, which is a big jump there, 18,000 miles. And then after that is 87,000, so another 14,000, which isn't, it could be worse. And then the last one is 97,000 miles. This was, I bought the car at 99. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 services. That is pretty good. Oh, sorry. No, 18 services because the 55 is also in the book. So if we have a look at the mileage now, it's on 105,866. So it's been 8,000 miles since the last service. I'm going to aim to do it from now on every 5,000 miles maximum because I want the engine in absolutely tip-top shape. So now if we look at the last service, which was done November 2020, so about a year ago at 97,000 miles, the timer belt kit was done on the auxiliary belt. So I don't know why they didn't do the water pump because the water pump has never been done. To be honest, it doesn't really matter anyway because even if they did the water pump, I'd be replacing it now anyway. Once the radiator's finished draining, remember to tighten it back up. Okay, we're going to start removing the plastic and the air filter system from the engine. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm bolts there. There's one there, and one there. If there's any more, I'll stop the video and let you know. Okay, I found another bolt. If you look just down here, you'll see it there. I've got a large extension and a small extension, and then the socket for this one because it's quite deep. Next, we're going to unplug the MAF sensor. Then you can use a 10mm socket to loosen this clamp and pull the air pipe away. Pull the front section away, and then you can start working these clips. They're a bit of a pain and they require a little bit of finesse, but once you get used to loosening them, they're a lot easier. Then you can remove the airbox from the engine bay. There's a clip here at the top on the vacuum hose. Just loosen that off and pull the hose from the pipe. Loosen the top clamp and then you can pull this section away as well. These 12mm bolts are in a really awkward position. They connect the throttle body section to the intake section. There's a gasket in between them as well that you need to remove. Don't forget it because you're going to need it later. These bottom ones, particularly this one, is the worst. You've just got to make sure that you have a tool that can fit in there, use some extensions, and you should be fine. Remove these vacuum hoses here. Just use a screwdriver on this one, makes it a little bit easier. Remove the clips and pull away. Here, if you push the throttle forward, it'll allow you to release the cable. Remove the throttle connector, and then you can start loosening these 12mm bolts, and then followed by the clip. You can just pull that from the bracket, and then loosen the bolts that hold the throttle cable to the throttle body. There's also two 12mm bolts below, keeping that bracket on. Remove the connector for the idle air control valve. And remove the connector for the throttle position sensor. On the right at the rear, near the intake, there's a few things you need to remove, like that hose, this connector, and there's another hose here that you need to remove. There's a really awkward nut underneath this bracket that you can use a ratchet spanner to get off. That's the easiest way that I found. And there's another nut on the other side as well. Don't be deceived by how easy it looks to get this hose off. That clip is a nightmare. Now we have to lift this whole section up and remove the final nut underneath. At the rear of the throttle body section, there's another hose you need to remove. After this, you can finally take this horribly designed throttle body away from the engine. And there's that gasket that I talked about earlier. You want to keep this safe because you're going to reinstall it later. I found it helpful to cover the intake with plastic and tape it all up because I knew that I was going to be a while and I didn't want anything to get inside. So taking that throttle body off was one of the worst things I've ever had to do on a car. The design is really strange. I don't know why they chose to do that. But it's off now and it's starting to rain, so I'm going to have to pack up soon, maybe, I think. Right, it's the next day and I've managed to secure a gazebo. So now we can do whatever we want as late as we want without the weather affecting things. I'm going to start removing the radiator hoses now and we'll take out the radiator. This is my makeshift construction light stand. It's for laundry. So now we're going to start removing the radiator. There's these two clips on the top hose here. If you just push them to the middle, then you can push the first side down, the radiator side, and then you can twist the engine side off. Then if you remove the clip to the overflow hose, you can remove the hose. Use a small screwdriver to remove the two fan connectors. This is a lot harder than it looks in the video, by the way. At the bottom of the radiator, disconnect the coolant temperature sensor. Be careful when you remove this hose, coolant is going to go absolutely everywhere. Okay, be ready for a lot of coolant to come out of there. It just soaked pretty much everywhere, including myself. There's another little hose here between the radiator and the fuse box. There's a little cable tie here holding the fan connectors to the side. You need to cut that so that you can take the radiator out. I just tuck them down here, out of the way. There's two 10mm bolts holding these brackets to the radiator, and once you've removed these, you can remove the radiator from the car. So this is why we remove the radiator in the first place. It's just so you've got a ton of extra room to work. There's no way you can do the timing belt without taking the radiator out. Next, we're going to remove the auxiliary belt, and then we're going to take the top timing cover off. So all you have to do here is get a 14mm socket and a ratchet and pull upwards and clockwise, and the auto tensioner will slide to the side so that you can pull off the belt. Here I'm just checking the condition of the bearings in the pulley, making sure that it spins freely with no horrible noises. There's 4 Allen bolts on the top timing cover. They're 5mm. Now when you're taking the middle section off, there's a bolt on the left, there's a bolt in the middle, and there's a bolt on the right. And the bolt on the right, as you can see here, I've used an Allen key just to go through that hole, and then I've used some pliers on the end of it. It's the easiest way to get this bolt out in my opinion. I wasn't able to fit any of my other tools in here, so hopefully you'll be able to use this method. Right, so now we need to get the timer marks in place. So you want to get these 2 dashes here and here in line with the bumps on the top there on the timer cover. So this one needs to be in line with this one, and the same on this side, this one and this one. You're going to turn the crank pulley clockwise. It's a 22mm bolt, and you just do a full rotation until you get the mark at the 0 and the timer marks are correct at the top. You might have to go around twice. Now there's 2 marks on the crank pulley as well. There's this one, and then there's this one. So you want the mark on the left to line up to the 0. You want top dead center, which is the dashes lining up at the top here with this mark on the left at 0. Okay, so now we're at 0 on the first mark, and dash lined up with the marks on the top. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the crank 60 degrees anti-clockwise so that the second mark under here is lined up with 0, and the dots here and here line up with the marks on the top. This is 60 degrees before top dead center. Okay, so now the second mark is on the 0, and the dots are both lined up with the marks on the top. Now we can loosen the crank pulley bolt. I've got this tool, which is supposedly for helping get this off. It's a copy of the official Toyota tool, and the idea is the bolts go in here and they lock on to the crank pulley like this, and there's obviously a hole that you can access the crank pulley bolt through. So it locks onto the crank pulley, and there's a 1/2 inch hole here so that you can put a breaker bar in, and you want that breaker bar wedged somewhere. So I'm going to position the jack so that it's wedged against the jack, and then we can loosen the crank pulley bolt. So I've actually decided to wedge it against the ground. Right, so we're ready to crack this bolt. I've got the other breaker bar on, and I've got the handle from the jack just as extra leverage. Okay, so I really struggled to crack this bolt loose here, and I think it's likely that you'll have the same problem. So now I'm going to walk you through a few methods that you can use to try and loosen it. Okay, it's the next morning, and I'm going to try the belt trick. So I've looped this belt, the old one, around the power steering, around the AC, and then it comes underneath the crank pulley, back around the water pump, and then it's looped underneath. So these are the same part right here, and then it loops underneath, and there's the loop right there, and I've just pushed it underneath as far as I can. So let's see, I did this on my IS200 and it was successful, so let's see what happens. The best way that you can push this loop further underneath the crank pulley and between the bottom side of the belt is to use a screwdriver. The most difficult part about using this method is getting the belt so tight that you don't alter the timing marks drastically, and unfortunately I did have this problem. I didn't have it last time with the IS200, so I'm going to have to move on to a different method. Since the belt thing didn't work, I'm back to using the proper tool, and I've borrowed a big bar, and if that doesn't work, then I've got another one to go on top of that. If this doesn't get it off, then I don't know what will. And it didn't get it off. The problem was that the orientation of the tightened bolt was making the angle so that the pole was hitting the side of the engine bay, so I had to switch to the other pole and put it upright, and it eventually cracked loose. Yes! So then I removed the special tool, and then I tightened the bolt just a little bit so that it could get the timer marks back in the perfect position. And then when it came to loosening the bolt again, I would just hold on to the crank pulley and then move the bar really quickly so that I wouldn't alter the time marks, just like this. Whew. Now this is a tough bolt. Now we've got to get the crank pulley off. So I've got this Harmonic balancer pulley kit. I'm going to use the 14mm bolts, 2 of those. They're going to go in here, and then this lead screw here is going to go in the middle. This is going to go in the exact same way as the other tool we used to get the bolt loose. Just make sure that they're evenly apart, and this center hole is in the middle so that you can push off the engine and pull the pulley off. So this is what it's going to look like when you finish setting it up. Basically, those 2 gold bolts either side are connected to the crank pulley, and the one in the middle is going through the bolt hole and pushing against part of the engine. So when you turn that ratchet clockwise, it's going to start tightening that black screw in the middle, and it's going to have nowhere to go. And because it's connected to the threads in the bracket, and the bracket is connected to the gold bolts, and the gold bolts are connected to the pulley, it's going to start pulling the pulley away from the engine. Also, it's going to take a really long time. When the crank eventually comes away from the engine, it's pretty heavy, so just be careful, get ready to catch it. And there we go, that's one crank pulley off. Once the crank pulley is off, we're going to remove this tensioner here, and it's just 3 12mm bolts. Now it's time to take the bottom timer cover off. Now the bolts are in really annoying places. There's one in the middle, which is fine. There's one behind here, which we're gonna have to take the power steering pump bracket off for. There's one down here, and there's one down here. There's also one behind the water pump right here. I think you can get to this one if you have a ratchet spanner, but if you can't get to it, then you're gonna have to take the water pump pulley off. So let's start by taking the power steering pump bracket off. There's a 14mm bolt there, and there's a 40mm bolt just in here. There's a third bolt that I didn't see right here. One of the bolts is shorter than the 2 others, I think this one is the one that we took out of here. There's a washer that goes here behind the power steering pump bracket. I dropped it when I was taking it off, and I just found it on the floor, and it took me a while to realize where it was from. Now we're going to take the bottom timer cover off. I'm going to try and get to the one behind the water pump pulley with this. And they're all 10mm. Now I've got pretty small hands, so you might not be able to get at this. And I've got pretty slim fingers as well, so just try it. If you can't, then you're going to have to take the water pump pulley off. There's a crank washer here that you need to take off. There's a little slot there that goes over the key. So just remember that the concave side points outwards. Okay, so we need to remove this tensioner here. And unfortunately, there's one bolt here and then one bolt right at the side of the alternator here. So it means we're going to have to take the alternator off. There's one bolt here, 14mm, and another 14mm here. So we're going to take the alternator off now. Going to have to use a deep socket for this, otherwise it's not going to fit. I would suggest that you unplug everything from the alternator so that you don't have to rest it on the side like I did. Now that the alternator is out the way, it's possible to get to both bolts. Right, here's the old tensioner. Remember to keep the bolts because I didn't get any bolts with my new one, so gonna have to use the same ones. Don't forget to check for the dust cover, it might still be inside. This is supposed to be on here. You'll notice that with the tensioner off, the belt is slackened. So now we're going to take the timing belt off, and then we're going to take the idler pulley off here. I just went really slow here and carefully edged it towards, starting from the top, and then on the bottom a little bit, and then just alternating between the two until it was off. I didn't want to move the timer marks, so I just took my time. You notice that this, I dropped it and dropped it again. Keep hold of this bolt because you don't get another one when you buy the pulley. So the washer is going to go on the back like this. I'm going to teleport a little bit here to earlier in the day when the timer belt was still on. I'm just letting you know so that it doesn't cause any confusion. I'm going to leave the timer belt on for now because I'm going to start taking all these wires out here. So basically we're going to start with these switches. There's one there. There's one there, and there's one there. Not switches, connectors. Be very careful when you're taking these out because one was already broken and I broke the other two, so just a heads up. Now there's a 10mm bolt here that you need to take out, and there's another one here. This will release this bracket and this bracket. Now underneath these brackets, there's another 10mm and one here too. So we're going to take these off. And there's also one at the back here. These bolts are holding the 3 coil packs in place. All these wires and coil packs should just pull out now. Be really careful when you're pulling these out because the spark plug wires have a tendency to bend and break. If this happens, then you're going to have hours of fault finding later on when you put it all back together. So I'm going to loosen this bracket here, holding all the wires. And I think that it's just this this one Allen bolt here. I'm guessing it's 5mm. It's time to take off the valve covers now. And we've got 2 10mm nuts at the back there. We've got 2 bolts here, 2 bolts here, and 2 nuts underneath here. On the outside, there's a nut at the back there, and there's 3 along here. And then the same on the other side, there's 4 on this side as well. Okay, I want to take this plastic thing off so I can get the valve covers off, and it's not making me happy. This clip right here, I think I'm going to undo this clip and it'll slacken this wire enough so that I don't have to take the whole thing off. I can lift and sort of slide out. So let's see how that goes. So do yourself a favor here, after you've undone this clip, unplug everything from the alternator and do your best to not do what I'm doing here. This puts a massive strain on the wiring loom and it's not a good idea. So if you can get that plastic thing out the way by unhooking everything, that's the best. I think there's a little bit of RTV in the corner right there. If you can see that little brown blob on the right. I think it's leaking from there, which is, I believe, a common place for oil to leak on these engines. So I think this is maybe evidence of a valve cover gasket leak. The oil on the inside there, and it dripping into the spark plug wells. Right, so they're both off. I've peeled the gaskets off. One of them in particular, I haven't checked the other one. This one is very brittle. Yeah, it's very brittle. So it is possible that that was causing a leak. And this one is, yeah, that's also the same. Doesn't feel good. So I've lightly cleared off using a screwdriver, very lightly, the corners there of the old RTV. And on the other side as well. So I'm going to put some Permatex here and here when I put the new gaskets on, because that's usually where you get leaks. Everything looks pretty good. It's old oil, remember, so it's going to be a bit black. But everything looks pretty good to me. No obvious signs of damage or wear. Maybe apart from this. I'm not sure if that's considered bad wear or not. I think that's okay. But the most important thing is there's no sludge or broken parts or, you know, big visible scratches. So I've got an adjustable here on the hex part of the cam. And I've got a 17mm impact socket on the Milwaukee. I should explain here that this is in preparation for removing the exhaust cam gear. Okay, so there's a little key in here. Right there, so you know exactly where it's going to go back on. It has moved a little bit from the timing spot, but we'll just put it back when we're finished. So I've got a 14mm hex on the end here. I had to actually borrow this because I only had up to 10. This isn't really something you get in a normal toolkit, so if you want to do the cam seals, make sure you have this first. Next, you need a 10mm hex. This is because there's a 10mm Allen bolt behind the 14mm one you just took out. Now we can remove the VVTi cam gear. Don't worry about the oil at the front, that's normal. Now to access the cam seals, you need to remove this guard at the front. And there's just 4 10mm bolts that you need to remove. Now we're going to remove the end cap on the exhaust side. It's just 2 10mm bolts. And once these bolts are out, you can just carefully pull the cap off. So as you can see, it is definitely leaking. So we're going to take that one out. Just like this. Now I use the barbecue skewer to actually pull my intake side out, but I wouldn't recommend this. I would recommend that you take the 2 10mm bolts out of the top there, and then behind this section there's also 5mm Allen bolts that hold this end cap in place. remove everything and do it that way, because it's a much better way of doing it than the way I did it. Here's the old seal, and I'm just going to open one of these new ones. This is the code for it. Actually, this is pretty bad. It's really like stiff and brittle, and compared to this one, the new one, it's so soft on the inward part, so that's definitely why they were leaking. Moving on now to replacing the water pump. We're going to start by removing this bracket, and there is a bracket at the back holding this connector on here as well. So it's just a 10mm bolt here and a 12mm bolt here. There's two 12mm bolts holding this bypass pipe in place. After I removed these bolts, I had to use a pry bar just from all different angles because it was quite stuck in there. So, as you can see, there's a lot of leaking coolant coming out of here. This is all dried up. And the reason is because this O-ring is busted. Right there on the underneath is where it's worn, so it's been leaking out. Just breaks down over time, and I don't think this has been changed since it left the factory, so never. On the top side there's another O-ring that we're going to change as well. Right, so the manual says that the next step is to remove this right here. Now, there's no way I'm getting my tools in there to remove those two bolts, so I think I'm going to take the front bolts out first, and then this hose will allow it to come down a little bit so I can get those two bolts out. There's 10 bolts in total on the water pump, but you only have to remove 6 to remove it from the engine. Those 6 bolts are these 2 at the top, this one, these 2 at the bottom, and the one at the bottom behind the pulley. Now, after you've removed these bolts, get ready and have a bowl underneath or something, because a lot of coolant is going to come gushing out the block. As I thought, now it's much easier to access these bolts on the back. Now that the water pump's out, I'm going to start taking it apart. So we can start by removing this main hose by undoing the clip and twisting it off. There's two 10mm nuts holding the thermostat housing pipe in place. So when you pull this pipe off, it reveals the old thermostat. Here's the part number for the new one, and you should get a load of seals with it as well. This seal with the little slot on the inside edge is the one that's going to go on the thermostat. When I bought my water pump, it actually came with a new thermostat housing as well, so I'm going to put the new thermostat into the new thermostat housing. Before I put the thermostat housing pipe back on, I just cleaned it up with some brake cleaner, a Scotch-Brite pad and a screwdriver. Just make sure that you let the brake cleaner dry thoroughly, because you don't want that to get on the seals because it will ruin them over time. Make sure the new thermostat's in the center, and then you can put the pipe back on. Torque the nuts down to 9 Newton meters, which isn't very much, so be careful you don't break them. Make sure you transfer this little drain hose at the bottom. Just take it off the old one and put it straight onto the new one. Now we have to remove the pulley from the old pump to put it on the new one. And the best way to do this is just to put it in a vise. Put the new assembly back in the vise and torque the nuts to 16 Newton meters. Here's the inside of the old water pump, and as you can see, Toyota parts, still looks pretty good. Right, now we're going to get our brand new Mishimoto radiator hoses. So I took a picture before of the exact position that it's supposed to be in. So if we put the picture next to the new water pump, we can see that this is the position that the hose is going to go on. I'm going to use some new stainless steel Jubilee clips.
Another thing is you might want to spray it with some WD-40.
Alright, the master says WD-40, so that's what we're going to do. Now, this was a pain to get on, but the one that connects to the radiator on the other side was an absolute nightmare, as you'll see in the next video. Last thing we're going to do is put the new gasket on for pipe number 2. This is the number 1 water bypass pipe, and we're going to take it out of the water bypass outlet. Again, this was a really stubborn component, so you might want to spray it with some WD-40 and whatever else you can do to make it easier for yourself. Here we're going to remove the seal from the outlet pipe, and as you can see, it is definitely degraded compared to the new one we're going to put in. Again, here I just used a little screwdriver to get all the crap out. Just clean it off with some brake cleaner. And just make sure you let this dry properly before you put the new seal in, otherwise you will shorten its life. It's also a good idea to clean all the contact surfaces. Now once it's clean, you can put the new seal in, make sure it's the right size. Now we're going to remove the seals from the little pipe we pulled out of the big pipe. Just make sure that you clean in every slot and every surface that you can, just so that you don't get any leaks. Here are the old seals here, you can see how degraded they are, so no wonder it was leaking. And you can really tell a difference here with the new seals. Once the new seals are on, you can dip them in a little bit of coolant and then put the little pipe back into the big pipe. And that is it. That is the end of part 1. Everything is disassembled and part 2 is on the way. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that the video was beneficial for you. I tried to keep the order and consistency as acceptable as I could, although it was a little bit off in parts. I didn't do the crank seal. I know. I kind of regret it now. I feel like I should have done it, but I will do it with the engine build. The front and rear main seal will be done then. I didn't put any music in this one, and that's because if you have to go back and watch a part like 5 or 6 times, it can get annoying listening to the music at the same time, and I just want to make it as clear as possible, so I chose not to put it in this time. I think that's what I'll do in the future as well. I think it's time to move on from putting music in every single video all the way through. If you wouldn't mind clicking the like button, that would be really appreciated. This took so long to film and edit. If you want to see more on the IS300 build, then please consider subscribing. It's going to be a 600 wheel horsepower 2JZ NAT fully built, as I've mentioned before. If you have any questions at all, please drop a comment below. I'm always around to answer questions. You can follow me on Instagram at ShizukasaJDM. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in part 2. See ya!